No one warned the hegemony about what was coming. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was assuming that because humanity had stayed quiet for 11 years, kept their fleets grounded, kept their ambassadors smiling, kept their weapons locked behind treaty clauses and diplomatic courtesies, they had somehow forgotten how to fight. The hegemony looked at Earth's silence and called it weakness. They looked at the human colonies pulling back from contested space and called it fear. They looked at the 7 years of careful, patient, deliberate restraint and decided it meant surrender. It did not mean surrender. It never did. The battlement of Sorvith Crossing was supposed to be a clean operation. That was the word the hegemony high command used in their briefings, clean. A surgical strike against the Arvith coalition's last major defensive position in the Delvara sector. A quick annihilation of whatever ragtag resistance the coalition could scrape together. And then an uncontested advance toward the 3 colony worlds that sat fat and unprotected on the other side of the nebula. Simple, efficient, clean. Commander Yena Orvath stood on the bridge of the HSC Revenant and watched the hegemony fleet drop out of fold space like a hammer falling from orbit. She counted them as they appeared on the long-range display, each new signature blooming into existence like a bruise spreading across pale skin. 14 cruisers, 22 destroyers, 6 carrier vessels, each one holding somewhere between 40 and 60 fighter-class ships in their bays. A flagship, the Dominion's voice sitting at the center of the formation like a cathedral built for war, its hull 3 kilometers of layered armor and charged particle weaponry. Yena counted them all, and she did not flinch. She had been in this sector for 9 days under a communications blackout, running silent, holding position at the edge of the Delvara Nebula's magnetic interference field, where hegemony sensors were about as useful as a candle held up against a sun. She had received her orders 6 weeks ago, not from Earth Command directly, but through the quiet back channels that existed for exactly these kinds of situations. The orders had been simple: wait, observe. And if the hegemony moved against the Arvith coalition in force, do what Terran battleships were built to do. The Arvith coalition was not an ally of Earth in any formal sense. They were not even particularly friendly. They were a loose confederation of 4 species spread across 11 systems, and their history with humanity was complicated in the way that all histories between space-faring civilizations tend to be complicated, full of misunderstandings and border disputes, and a few incidents that had come closer to open conflict than anyone liked to remember. But they were not the hegemony. And the hegemony, in the last 3 years, had become something that Yena's government could not afford to let grow any larger. The coalition's defense fleet was already engaging. Yena watched the battle unfold on her tactical display with the detached calm of someone watching a fire consume a building they had no power to stop, yet. 21 coalition warships against the full weight of a hegemony invasion force. They were brave. She would give them that without hesitation. The coalition captains pushed their ships hard, using the nebula's edge to break line of sight on the carrier vessels, trying to isolate the cruisers and engage them one at a time, rather than absorbing the full broadside of that entire formation. It was good tactics. It was not enough tactics. Within 14 minutes, 3 coalition destroyers were gone, not damaged, not disabled, gone, torn apart by concentrated fire from the hegemony cruisers who had more guns, more armor, more everything. The coalition flagship was burning along its port side, 2 of its primary drive columns shattered, reduced from a maneuvering warship to something closer to a slowly rotating target. The remaining 18 coalition vessels were falling back, pressing deeper into the nebula, trying to buy seconds with distance because minutes were already gone. Lieutenant Commander Dario Vasques appeared at Yena's shoulder. He was her tactical officer, a quiet man from New Cascadia who had a habit of stating facts in the same tone other people used to discuss the weather. He said, "Coalition is going to lose the field in approximately 22 minutes. Yena said, "I know." He said, "Hegemony carrier vessels are repositioning. They're going to cut off the coalition retreat vectors through the nebula. Yina said, I see it. He said, if we're going to do this, Commander, the window is now. Yina looked at the display for 3 more seconds. She looked at the burning coalition flagship. She looked at the hegemony formation, clean, organized, completely confident, completely unaware, spreading out across the battlefield like they owned it because they believed they did. She said, Helm, bring us out of the interference field. Full power to drives. Weapons, I want everything charged and ready before we clear the magnetic boundary. Communications, open a channel to the hegemony flagship on their primary frequency. The Revenant moved. There is a particular quality to the way a Terran battleship moves when it is no longer hiding. It does not ease into motion. It does not gradually build speed the way smaller vessels do, carefully managing momentum and inertia. A Terran battleship at full drive acceleration moves the way a tectonic plate moves, with a kind of vast, terrible, unstoppable inevitability that makes the concept of resistance feel almost philosophical. The Revenant came out of the nebula's interference field at a speed that hegemony sensor operators would later describe in their damage reports as impossible for a vessel of that mass class, which said more about the limits of hegemony engineering than it did about anything special the Revenant was doing. She was doing exactly what she was designed to do. The hegemony fleet saw her at the same moment Yina's communications officer opened the channel. Yina spoke clearly because this message was not just for the hegemony commander on the Dominion's voice. This message was being recorded. This message was going to be reviewed by diplomats and admirals and heads of state across 40 systems. This message mattered beyond the battle it was opening. She said, This is Commander Yina Orvath of the Terran Battleship Revenant, operating under authority of Earth's Interstellar Defense Compact, Article 7, Section 3, Intervention in cases of unprovoked aggression against non-aligned civilizations. You are ordered to halt your advance, withdraw your fleet to the far side of the Delvara sector boundary, and stand by for communication from Earth's diplomatic corps. You have 90 seconds to comply. If you do not comply, I will engage your fleet. I want to be very clear about something before your commander makes a decision. I am not a patrol vessel. I am not a frontier escort. I am not a ship that was sent here to make a point-through presence alone. I am a Terran battleship, and I am telling you that if you do not turn around in the next 90 seconds, I will destroy enough of your fleet that the hegemony high command will spend the next decade trying to explain to their own people what happened here today. She cut the channel. Vask said quietly, think they'll comply. Yina watched the hegemony formation on her display. She watched the carrier vessels completing their repositioning. She watched the cruisers holding formation, weapons still hot from the engagement with the coalition fleet. She watched the Dominion's voice sitting enormous and certain at the center of it all. She said no. She was right. The hegemony commander, a faction admiral named Grievous Solon, who had been winning battles for 23 years and who had faced down coalition resistance fleets 3 times the size of what he had encountered today, made his decision in 40 seconds flat. He had studied humanity's treaty behavior. He had studied their withdrawal patterns. He had studied every engagement in which Terran vessels had been present over the last 15 years, and his analysis had concluded that Earth's government was fundamentally risk-averse, that their military posturing was designed to avoid escalation rather than invite it, and that a single battleship appearing at the edge of a battle they were already winning was a political gesture, not a tactical threat. He ordered his fleet to continue the operation. He ordered 4 of his cruisers to break from the main formation and intercept the Revenant. He did not order his carrier vessels to launch their fighters because he did not think he would need them. Yina watched the 4 cruisers begin their approach and felt something settle in her chest, not anger, not fear, something older and quieter than either of those things, something that felt like clarity. She said, weapons, Target the lead cruiser's drive section. Single shot railgun battery 1. Fire when ready. The sound a Terran battleship's primary railgun makes when it fires is not the dramatic thunderclap that most species expect from a weapon of that scale. It is a deep, resonant pulse, felt more than heard, a vibration that moves through the hull and up through the deck plating and into the bones of everyone aboard. The electromagnetic coils along the Revenant's port spine discharged in a cascade sequence that lasted 0.4 seconds, accelerating a 2-ton tungsten carbide penetrator rod to a velocity that turned the concept of armor into something closer to a suggestion. The penetrator crossed the distance to the lead hegemony cruiser in less time than it takes to exhale. It did not destroy the cruiser. Yina had not aimed to destroy it. She had aimed for the drive section, and that is exactly what she hit. The cruiser's primary propulsion array came apart in a cascade of secondary explosions that left the vessel dead in space, spinning slowly, completely unable to maneuver, its crew alive but going nowhere. The other 3 cruisers stopped. They did not reverse course. They did not retreat. They stopped, the way things stop when they suddenly realize the ground ahead of them is not ground at all. Yina said, "Open all channels. Hegemony fleet, coalition fleet, everyone in sensor range. I want them all to hear this." Her communications officer said, "You're live, Commander." Yina said, "That was one shot from one weapon system on this vessel. I have 14 primary railgun batteries. I have 32 secondary particle beam emitters. I have missile tubes that can put a warhead on any target in this engagement zone before your point defense systems have time to register the launch signature. I am not here to negotiate a ceasefire. I am not here to posture. I am here because the hegemony decided to invade a sector they have no claim to, and because someone needed to show up and make that decision expensive." She paused. "Withdraw, now, all of you. Every ship, every fighter still in the bays, every vessel in this formation. Turn around, go back the way you came, and tell your high command that the Delvara sector is closed to hegemony military operations. If I see a hegemony warship in this sector again, I will not aim for the drive section." She cut the channel again. For 11 seconds, nothing moved. 11 seconds is not a long time by most measures. It is not long enough to make a cup of coffee or read a short news article or have any kind of meaningful conversation. But in the middle of a battle, in the space between a threat delivered and a decision made, 11 seconds is an enormous amount of time. 11 seconds is enough time for a fleet commander to look at his tactical display and see a vessel that has just demonstrated, casually and without apparent effort, that it can reach out across 30,000 kilometers and surgically remove a warship's ability to function. 11 seconds is enough time to recalculate, to reassess, to feel, perhaps for the first time in a long career of victories, genuinely uncertain. Faction Admiral Grievous Solon spent those 11 seconds looking at his display. He looked at the Revenant silhouette, longer than his flagship, denser, built with a kind of brutal geometric efficiency that hegemony warship designers had never quite managed to replicate. He looked at the crippled cruiser spinning in the dark. He looked at the 14 railgun batteries, highlighted on the Revenant's hull schematic that his intelligence officer had pulled up the moment the ship had cleared the nebula. He looked at all of it, and then he made the only decision that a man in his position, with his experience, and with his genuine desire to still be alive next week, could reasonably make. He ordered the retreat. It did not happen quickly. A fleet of 40-plus vessels does not turn around the way a single ship does. It is a complicated, layered process of formation changes and drive recalibrations and fighter recall operations that takes time and space and coordination. Yina watched it happen on her display with the same patient attention she had given the battle's opening stages. She watched the carrier vessels beginning to reel in their fighter wings. She watched the cruiser formation starting to reorganize for withdrawal. She watched the Dominion's voice itself beginning to rotate on its axis, bringing its drives to bear for the fold space jump that would take it back across the sector boundary. She did not fire again. She did not need to. The Coalition fleet, what remained of it, had gone quiet during those 11 seconds. Now, as the hegemony withdrawal became unmistakable, Yena's communications officer reported a hail on a standard Coalition frequency, hesitant, almost disbelieving. She took the call. The voice on the other end belonged to someone who identified themselves as Acting Commander Pethys Vorath of the Coalition vessel Steadfast Resistance. The new acting commander, because the original commander of the Coalition flagship was in the medical bay with 3 broken limbs and a concussion from the hits the ship had taken. Vorath's voice had the quality of someone who had been absolutely certain they were about to die and had not yet fully processed the fact that they were not. Vorath said, "Terran vessel, I see what just happened." Yena said, "The hegemony is withdrawing." Vorath said, "Because of you, one ship." Yena said, "We tend to make an impression." There was a long pause. Then Vorath said very quietly, "We had 20 minutes left, maybe less. Our retreat vectors were almost completely blocked. We were." Another pause. "Thank you, Commander. I don't know what else to say." Yena said, "You don't need to say anything. Get your wounded to medical. Get your ships patched up. And when your government sends a diplomatic message to Earth in the next few days, and they will tell them that humanity would like to talk about the future of this sector." She cut the channel. Vasquez appeared at her shoulder again. He looked at the display, where the hegemony fleet was now in full withdrawal, drives burning bright as they accelerated away. He looked at the crippled cruiser still spinning in the dark, which would need to be dealt with, its crew extracted, the vessel assessed, the whole situation documented for the diplomatic firestorm that was already building somewhere in a conference room on Earth. He said, "One shot." Yena said, "One shot." He said, "They had 40-some warships, and we fired one shot and they left." Yena said, "We fired the right shot." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Intelligence said Solon had never retreated in 23 years of command." Yena said, "There's a first time for everything." She turned away from the display and walked toward the command chair, and as she walked she could feel the tension bleeding out of the bridge around her, not dramatically, not in any way that would look impressive from the outside, but in the small human ways that meant something to anyone who had ever stood in a combat situation and come out the other side. A breath held too long finally released, shoulders dropping a half-inch. The particular quality of silence that only exists after something terrible has been prevented. She sat down. She said, "Communications, get me a tight beam to Earth Command. Encrypted, priority 1. I need to file an engagement report and let them know we're going to need a diplomatic team out here within the week." She said, "Medical, confirm all crew status. I want to know if anyone took any kind of injury during the engagement." She said, "Engineering, full systems check. I want to know if that drive push through the magnetic field cost us anything." The bridge moved around her, everyone returning to their work, the ship breathing again in its normal rhythms. Outside, in the dark, the last of the hegemony fleet was folding out of the system, going home, going back to whatever room their high command met in, going back to the maps and the strategy sessions, and the long discussions about what had happened in the Delvara sector today and what it meant, and what they were going to do about it. Yena already knew what it meant. She had known before she fired the first shot. She had known before she brought the Revenant out of the interference field. She had known in some quiet and certain part of herself for years, since the day she had first stood on the bridge of a Terran battleship and understood what she was standing inside of. Not just a weapon, not just a warship, a statement. A declaration written in steel and charged particle beams, and the particular mathematics of what happens when you accelerate 2 tons of tungsten to a significant fraction of the speed of light. The statement was simple. It had always been simple. You are not alone out here, and the things you think you can do unchallenged, the invasions you think you can run clean, the civilizations you think you can crush because no one with the power to stop you is watching, you are wrong about all of that. We are watching. We are always watching. And when we decide to move, one ship is enough. The Revenant held position at the edge of the Delvara Nebula for 6 more days, while Earth's diplomatic team made the journey through fold space. During that time, Yena's crew patched up the crippled Hegemony cruiser's life support systems to make sure the 700 beings aboard it didn't die before they could be processed, and eventually returned to Hegemony space. During that time, the Coalition fleet limped into formation nearby, and the surviving Coalition captains, all of whom had been absolutely certain they were dead 11 days ago, took to sending small messages through on open frequencies. Not formal communications, not diplomatic language, just small things. A Coalition tradition for offering respect that Yena's cultural database translated as something close to bearing witness to shared survival. During that time, Yena wrote her engagement report with the same careful precision she brought to everything, noting every decision and every reason for it, and every outcome she could observe, because the report would be read by people making decisions about the next time and the time after that, and she owed those people accuracy. On the 7th day, the diplomatic team arrived. On the 8th day, the negotiations began. On the 43rd day, the Delvara Sector Accord was signed, a formal agreement that established the sector as a protected zone under Joint Earth Coalition security guarantee, with Hegemony military vessels prohibited from operating within its boundaries without mutual consent from both signatories. It was not a perfect agreement. No agreement ever is. There were clauses that Earth's negotiators had wanted and didn't get, and clauses that the Coalition had wanted and had to compromise on, and several provisions that both sides knew would require revisiting within a decade as the political landscape continued to shift. But it was an agreement, it existed, it was real. And it existed because a Terran battleship had come out of a nebula at exactly the right moment, and fired exactly one shot, and made a fleet of 40-something warships understand something that they had apparently needed a very direct demonstration to grasp. The Hegemony did not attack the Delvara sector again. Not that year, not the year after, not in the 5 years that followed, during which the political situation in that region of space shifted in ways that made the accord look less like a temporary measure and more like the foundation of something that might actually last. Grievous Solon retired from Hegemony military service 14 months after the battle. His retirement speech, which was recorded and eventually made its way into Earth's intelligence databases through the usual channels, contained a single line that Yena's staff flagged for her attention when they compiled the quarterly intelligence summary. Solon had said, standing in front of whatever Hegemony equivalent of a formal military ceremony existed, "I have faced many enemies in my career, and I have defeated most of them. I know the difference between an enemy that does not want to fight and an enemy that has chosen not to fight yet. The Terrans do not want war, but they have decided, completely and without reservation, what they will do if war finds them anyway. I no longer wish to be the person responsible for finding out exactly how much they mean it." Yena read that line 3 times. Then she forwarded it to Earth Command with a single note attached. The note said he understood. Outside the Revenant's viewport, the stars held their positions with the patient permanence of things that have existed long enough to watch entire civilizations rise and burn and collapse and rebuild. They did not care about accords or retreats or the particular arithmetic of what happens when a Terran battleship decides to stop being quiet. They simply burned as they always had, as they would long after every ship and every commander and every battle fought in their light had dissolved into the deep past. But the Revenant was still there, still holding, still watching, And somewhere on the other side of the sector boundary, a fleet that had come here expecting a clean operation was going home to explain why it hadn't been clean at all, why one ship had changed everything, why the math had refused to work the way they had expected, why the silence they had mistaken for weakness had turned out to be something else entirely. Something patient, something certain, something that, when it finally decided to move, needed only one shot to make its point perfectly clear.